going to walk you through the X-ray vision component, how to get it set up, how to adjust some of the included settings, and how to change the colors and other material parameters included in the project. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the very first thing you want to do is actually open the project settings here. You can find this in Edit, Project Settings, and that'll open this window. And you want to search up here for Stencil. And you're going to find under Post-Processing here, Custom Depth Stencil Pass. You want to make sure this is set to Enable with Stencil. Otherwise, the X-ray vision isn't going to work. Now that we have that enabled, I'm going to open the example character included in the project. I've gone ahead and deleted everything here just to have a fresh start and show you how everything is set up. So to begin with, I'm going to come over here and add the BPC X-ray vision component. I'm going to drag this into our blueprint, and I need to initialize this on Event Begin Play. So off the component, I'm going to drag off here and search for Initialize. And you want to get the X-ray vision, not the widget. I'm going to plug that into Begin Play and hook up our player camera here. And then you can check this on by default, and your X-ray vision is automatically enabled. If you don't want it to start enabled, you can just leave that unchecked. Now there's two ways to go about toggling the X-ray vision off and on. There's a very simple, easy version, and then there's another version that's just a little more polished, a little nicer, it feels a little better when you're playing a game. So I'm going to show you both ways, but to start off with, let's just do the simple one. I'm going to grab an input here. Let's do the F key. And I'm going to grab a flip-flop. And then I'm going to drag another of our component into the blueprint here and look for Toggle X-ray vision. I'm going to hook that up to our flip-flop, and I'm just going to make sure that the vision alpha is set to 1. I'm going to make a copy of this and plug it into the next executable of our flip-flop and hook up our component as well and set this to 0. So now if we press play here, you can see we can toggle our X-ray vision on and off. But this feels a little abrupt to me. It's a little jarring, and I think we can smooth this out a little bit. In order to do this, we're actually going to use a timeline to blend these variables on and off. I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here and nudge this over a little bit and disconnect it from our flip-flop. Now there's a timeline included in the example character, and the easiest way, the fastest way to get this implemented is to just copy this over into your own character. It should carry these outputs over with it. In case it doesn't, I'm going to go through how to set these up in a moment, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to reuse this one just to show you how it works. I'm going to plug the A of our flip-flop into play here, and the B into reverse. Then I'm going to plug the update into our toggle X-ray vision. And you'll see here we have some matching variable names, so I'm just going to connect these, and then blur alpha to blur alpha and blink alpha to blink alpha. And then when we press play, you can see this is much nicer. There's a very smooth transition between the two. So just in case copying this timeline over didn't work for you, or you just want to understand how it works so that you can customize it to your liking, we're going to go ahead and make our own from scratch. So I'm just going to disconnect this and move it off to the side for now. So off of A, I'm going to search for Add Timeline. And you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it X-ray Timeline. And I'm going to hook this up the same way that we did before, just plugging the B into reverse and the update into our toggle X-ray vision. But you can see we're missing some of these additional variables, so that's what we're going to create now. You just double click to open up the timeline, I'm going to set the timeline length to something like 0.75. And I'm going to press this add track button up here, and the first one we're going to need is a float track. This first one is going to be for the X-ray vision itself, so we'll just call it Vision Alpha. And I'm going to right click to add a key to this curve, and let's set it at 0. And I'm going to right click again to add another key, and let's set this one to 0.35 for our time and 1 for our value. And then I'm going to select both of these keys and right click and select auto just to make the curve a little smoother. So what this does is it blends the X-ray vision post-process material from off at a value of 0 to on at a value of 1. And I wanted it to happen a little faster than the actual length of our timeline, so that's why I set it to 35 in our time here, just so that the player receives that information a little more quickly. Next, we're going to do the same for a radial blur material that just adds some more depth to the effect. But this time we're going to toggle it all the way on and then all the way off before the timeline completes. So I'm going to add another track here. We're going to pick float track. Let's call this blur alpha. Again, we're going to right click and create a key and set this to 0 in both the time and the value. I want the radial blur to be at full strength about halfway through this timeline, so I'm going to right click and add another key, and since our timeline length is 0.75 seconds, I'm going to set this to 0.375. It's about halfway, and because I want it to be at full visibility, I'm going to set it to 1. So now our radial blur will turn all the way on. Now I want it to turn all the way off, so I'm going to add another key, set our time to the end of the timeline, and set the value to 0. If you press these arrows here, it'll just frame our curve in the viewport. Makes it a little easier to select everything. And set to auto, so we have a nice smooth blend again. The last track that we need to create will control the visibility of a widget that creates a sort of blink effect when we enable or disable the X-ray vision. To do that, I'm going to create a color track this time. Let's call this Blink Alpha. As you can see, this one's a little different from the curves that we created before. It's got 2 keys. One controls the color, and one controls the opacity, or the visibility. So at the very beginning, I actually want the visibility to be 0, so I'm going to lower the opacity to 0 here. I'm going to find another key in the middle here. I'm going to set the color to a black. Because I always want the player to have full visibility, I'm going to set the opacity to something like 0.25. I'm going to add one more key to the end here. You can set the time of it by right clicking and typing in the time here, and I want this to happen at the end, so I'm going to set it to 0.75. You're going to have to do that for each stop. I'm going to change the color to black again just to have that consistency, but I'm going to set the opacity to 0. That way our blink will kind of fade in a little bit and fade out. Now that we're done creating the tracks for our timeline, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this, and all we have to do is hook up these new variables. And now you'll see our X-ray vision is working as it did before. If you're adding this to your own project, you may have noticed that the characters and objects in your scene are not being highlighted by the X-ray vision. As you can see, this character to my right here is not being highlighted or affected at all. So I'm going to show you how to get that set up now. It's pretty straightforward. All you got to do is select the object or character that you want to receive a highlight from the X-ray vision. and come down here to the details panel and search for depth. You can see there's an option for render custom depth pass. You want to make sure this is set to enabled. And the next part is very important. If this number is still set to 0, it's not going to receive a highlight regardless of this custom depth pass being enabled. So I'm going to set this to 1. And now you can see this character is receiving a highlight with the rest of them. But you can also see in this scene that some of the characters are receiving different colors, including the player character. I've done it this way so that you can differentiate between important information, such as enemies, targets, or even allies. Each of these colors are assigned by a number value that you can set in the custom depth stencil value here. So 1 will be for enemies, 2 will be for targets, 3 will be for allies, 4 will be for information, and 5 will be for the player. So I'm going to set this character as an ally. As mentioned before, this is also possible with the player character. So I'm going to select our character mesh here and search for depth. And as you can see, the custom depth is enabled and the color value is set to 5. If you select the X-ray vision component here, on the right side in the details panel, you'll see we have a tab for X-ray settings. And under here is a material array. There's 2 materials here. The bottom material here is our radial blur, which is set to off by default. And its strength is controlled using the timeline like we set up before. This first material on the top here is a post-process shader used to actually highlight our characters and enable the X-ray vision. By selecting this drop down here, you can choose from the many presets included in the project, but I'll show you how to set up your own as well. To do that, I'm going to go into the material folder in our content browser here and create a material instance or a copy of this X-ray vision base. I'm going to right click and create a material instance. We'll call that material instance X-ray custom. Then I'll go ahead and open this up. And you'll see there's not a lot going on here in our viewport. It just looks the same as usual. And that's because the X-ray vision shader is being toggled on and off by our timeline here. So we won't necessarily be able to see our changes taking effect right away. In order to get around this, I'm going to go ahead and apply this material to our character. To do that, I'm going to hit the browse here so that it automatically takes us to the material in the content browser. And with this selected, I'm going to come back to our X-ray vision component here and just paste it to our X-ray material here. I want to be able to see what we're changing in real time, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this out as its own window. Just kind of adjust it so I can see the settings a little better. And then I'm going to get our viewport started up here and just enable our X-ray vision. Now I can adjust this in real time and we can see the effects taking place. These first few settings adjust the noise pattern that we can see here in our X-ray vision. It creates this kind of wavy fantasy effect. If you want something a little more modern or grounded, you can just set this to 0 and it will be completely still. But if you want something really crazy, you can set this to a really high number. This looks a little too noisy to me, it's not very clear, so I'm just going to set it back to our default value here. The noise scale actually scales the texture that's creating the noise pattern. The noise speed controls how quickly the noise pattern moves. So if I set this to something slower, you can see now there's barely any movement. But I can also set this to something really fast. Now we have a lot of movement. You can also adjust the vignette radius and strength as well. And this last value here controls the contrast between the background colors. You can also change the noise pattern by using your own custom noise texture if you'd like. Down here we can change the colors for our different stencil depths. You can see here the numbers correspond to each color as we went through before. So 1 being enemy, 2 being target, 3 being ally, 4 being information, and 5 being the player. We also have 2 world colors here used to change the color of the background. I'm going to change that to a bright red color. I'm going to do something maybe a little more pink for the second color. You can see that's really affected the look of our background. To make the enemies stand out a little more, let's change this to a bright green. And for the target, let's make that blue. Now that makes our target and our allies a little confusing, so let's change our allies to something like orange. You can see this character in the corner here has the information depth assigned to it. So let's change that to also be red. And lastly, we have the player color, which I'm going to set to purple. Now we have a really crazy looking X-ray vision. Something I forgot to mention previously is a lot of games that have this X-ray feature will have some sort of automatic timer to turn off the X-ray visibility. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to start by getting rid of this flip-flop and just hooking the pressed into play. Then off of the release, I'm going to search for a delay. And I'm going to plug the complete into our reverse here. The duration of this delay will define how long the X-ray vision will be on before it automatically turns off again. I'm going to set this to something like 2 seconds. And now you can see that our X-ray vision automatically turns off after about 2 seconds. And that's all there is to the X-ray vision component. I'll be working on the Stealth Vision Pack updated tutorial next, and I've got a couple requests to show you how to get this working with Advanced Locomotion System, as it doesn't use a traditional camera system. So you can expect that in the near future as well. But for now, that's a wrap on the X-ray vision component. Thanks for watching.